Hello, I'm Mark Hughes. Welcome to this edition of Disability Viewpoints. With me today is our co-host, Joan Willshire. Joan is just a great individual who has a disability, great advocate, used to be the Executive Director of the State Council on Disabilities, did a great job over there, and now has her own consulting business. So my guest today is Sindy Mau. She is the author of Taking Care of Me. It's a new book out. Joan, who's your guest today?
Well, we are going to be talking about the Olmstead Implementation Office, otherwise known as OIO. They're finishing up on their 2026 plan to get that out to all the counties and entities to help people with disabilities move back into an integrated setting after having lived in a long-term care situation.
Great. The Olmstead was being put together when I was on the State Council. Time flies.
Right.
Anyway, all that and more is coming up next on Disability Viewpoints. Should be an action-packed half hour. Stay tuned.
Freedom means having control over your own life. That includes choosing where to live, what kind of work to do, and how to spend your time, and even who you spend your time with. These choices are connected to identity, dignity, and the ability to belong. So what we're talking about today is the Minnesota Olmstead Implementation Plan. And with me today, via Zoom, is Jenn Purrington, the Deputy Director of the Olmstead Implementation Office, otherwise known as the OIO. So welcome, Jenn.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, well, I think we need to start with some basics so our viewers can understand.
Absolutely. So first I'll just say my name is Jenn Purrington. I use she, her pronouns. I am today wearing a sort of purplish dress with a black sweater. I've got wavy, sort of blondish, brownish hair, and I'm a white woman. And I'm the Deputy Director of the Olmstead Implementation Office, and right now I'm the Interim Director as well. And Olmstead came from the Supreme Court case in 1999, Olmstead versus LC, which is Lois Curtis. Lois Curtis and Elaine Wilson are two women with disabilities who were living in institutions in Georgia and wanted to live in the community. And so they brought this case. And the case was decided based on the Americans with Disabilities Act, that people with disabilities have the right to live in the community when appropriate. So that's, where Olmstead comes from. And I realize in Minnesota, Olmstead is a county as well, so it can get confused.
We've got to make that clear in Minnesota.
Yep, it's spelled differently, the Olmstead case, but that's where where it comes from. And the Olmstead plan that Minnesota has is a set of goals for Minnesota state agencies. The goals help fulfill the right of people with disabilities to live full integrated lives in their communities. The current plan covers a variety of topics, including individual choice, housing, education, employment, transportation, and more. And we are currently in the process of rewriting the Olmstead plan. And so we're hoping that will be finalized by the end of this year.
Wow, that's a huge undertaking.
Yeah.
Huge undertaking. So, and it sounds like this time around you're doing it differently. You've got advocates that you've hired that are basically there along with the sub-cabinet now?
So we have hired, and I should say, I just joined in November. So I joined sort of mid to late process, but there's a great team of people who have already been part of the Olmstead Implementation Office. So I've been sort of caught up in all the work that they've been doing. And so I can speak to that for sure. But they have hired inclusion consultants earlier this year, and those are people with lived experience with disability. And they are part of these different agency teams. So the different agencies, there are 12 different state agency teams or entities, plus the Metropolitan Council. And then DCYF, or the Department of Children, Youth, and Families, and DCT, which is Direct Care and Treatment, are part of this new draft plan, although they aren't on the sub-cabinet yet, but we know that they sort of broke off from the Department of Human Services more recently. And so they have their own goals in this plan as well. But we have this process where these inclusion consultants are part of these teams. They're giving their feedback, they're sharing their experience. And they actually just helped us recently. We did some community meetings for public feedback, and they facilitated those meetings. So they are continuing to be involved because now we are doing public comment. And we're going to be processing all that public comment, and all of it will be going back to those agency teams, and those inclusion consultants will be part of that as well, trying to figure out how to implement the public comment and the needs of the community into the current draft plan.
Wow. So let's talk about the public comment and surveys and so forth. What are some of the common responses that you're receiving from these communication pieces?
Sure. So we did community meetings in April, and those were virtual and covered 7 different topics. So that would be education, employment, health and safety, housing, crisis services, transit/transportation, and then transition, which is really like transitioning from a segregated setting to a non-segregated setting, which could involve many different things, including waivers, which is a big issue, making sure people have the services they need to live independently. So we had these virtual meetings, and like I said, the inclusion consultants facilitated them. And then we have this online survey that is still open now. It's open through the 8th. Of May, and then there will be some our other language and ASL surveys are available through May 23rd. And so we are not completely done getting our feedback, but right now we have tried to look through the feedback that we've received. I think there's definitely the disability community and people working in that community are concerned about transportation, and especially the differences between transportation in, a metro area versus greater Minnesota.
Right.
And the challenges there. So that's, expected feedback, but really helpful feedback because people are giving us very specific examples and barriers and challenges that they're facing. So that's one area. Education is always one that people, are very passionate about, have a lot of feedback on. It's usually obviously parents who are giving that feedback, or people who have engaged with the education system and, are reflecting back on their experience. And I think, I don't know if we know exactly what all of the trends are yet. That's sort of our next step in the process, is coding all this feedback and then figuring out what are the different themes that we're getting, and what are people most concerned about, and what information do we need to take back to these agencies for them to consider and learn more about. And thankfully we have inclusion consultants in those meetings so they can also provide their own context as well, and their own experiences.
Wow. So it's sounds like a lot, like you've got a lot of moving pieces. And so you haven't really analyzed some of the information and the comments that you've gotten back yet, it sounds like.
Yeah, we're really looking at it right now as data and getting things into the right categories and making sure we're not missing anything. And then as soon as the public comment period closes, we'll be summarizing and synthesizing and making sure we get that important information back to those agencies so they know what the public is sharing with them. Okay, so
it's one of those things where we have to kind of keep moving the ball in some capacity, right?
Absolutely. I think the goal of this new plan is to make sure that the voice of people with disabilities is integrated into the work. That, part of the plan talks about nothing about us without us, and really making sure that not only are we getting public comment from the community, which is extremely important, and we've done surveys, we've done community meetings before the goals were even written, and we also just have people embedded into these agency discussions as they're happening. So we're hopeful that that sort of newer process will continue forward, and maybe even expand. And I think this has been a really good learning experience for everyone. And I think it will hopefully help us improve the process moving forward. And has given the agencies a really good look into accessibility and the needs of the community by having someone sitting at the table talking about their own experience or experience with other people in their community or people they know, family, friends. You know, there's a lot they can share.
Do we have any actual numbers of knowing X amount of people are being relocated out of institutions?
I wouldn't have those numbers right now, but yes, I think there are numbers that the different agencies have.
Because it seems like we used to be able to get that number, so.
Yes.
So, okay, because that would be fabulous at some point, if we can start talking by numbers. And then outstate versus the in-state, because it's so different depending on the counties that you live in, so.
It absolutely is. We
So-
also have a compliance piece of the Olmstead office, and that is the piece that, you know, is still ongoing with the current plan, but we have had one of our longtime staff members as part of that, and he's retiring, and we have a staff member who's been there for a few years taking over that role. And so compliance is a big piece of making sure there are measurable goals in the first place so that we can then measure them and share that information so people feel like they have it. So
Right. Well, so before we wrap up here, what's the ideal endpoint here? I mean, because this is going to be ongoing as people are slowly being reintegrated back into the community of their choice. How are you feeling about the direction? Are we getting there?
Absolutely. I think that there's always work to be done, and I've been sort of in the disability advocacy space for many years, and there's always more work to be done. So I don't ever have to ask the disability community to continue pushing and continue asking for progress. They naturally do that because they're such great advocates for themselves and for their community. But that's what I think this public comment is about, is hearing those concerns and making sure we're addressing them. I think that there's always more work to be done, and this is a 5-year plan.
Well, we're just out of time here. One last note, how can somebody reach you to learn more about the plan? Why don't you give your website?
You can reach our office, the Olmstead Implementation Office. We have on our website right now is all of the information, a draft of the plan, and all of the different ways to give us feedback, including our email. But our website, which is the best place to go, is minnesota.gov/Olmstead, which is OLMSTEAD.
Great.
And signing up for our newsletter. We don't blast people very much, but when things change, when we're asking for information, that's when you're going to hear from us, or if there are any updates. So it's a really great way to stay connected to our work.
Okay, well, thanks again for being my guest, and good luck in your future endeavors with OIO.
Thank you so much. I appreciate your time.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Welcome back to Disability Viewpoints. Sindy Mau is our next guest on Disability Viewpoints, and she's got a book out called Taking Care of Me. Not necessarily me, that's the title, Taking Care of Me. And she's going to tell us how this project all got started and what it takes and what's in the book and all of what we should know. So Sindy, welcome to the show.
Thank you. So my name is Sindy Mau. My agency is Aging Options, and this workbook is funded by the Innovations Grant through Disability Services as part of the Minnesota Department of Human Services. I applied for the grant and I received the grant. So that's what created this workbook. I have a background in disability services and also in self-defense. And so I decided that I would combine the two.
So don't mess with Sindy.
Don't mess with Sindy, yeah. So the workbook actually is kind of a self-defense handbook, which is actually applicable to anyone, regardless of whether or not you have a disability. The concepts are applicable to all people, and it starts with the basis of self-esteem, and then it builds on each other of self-esteem, assertiveness, confident body language, intuition, surprise, yell, and then surviving and healing.
Great.
Yeah, then there are a couple of sections with interactive guides to review the concepts, to kind of put the concepts into practice with a variety of different situations, real life situations. And then there's a bit of analysis of disability and vulnerability and how that is seen in society, some definitions of ableism and how ableism is similar to other forms of oppression such as racism, sexism, etc. Then we have a resource guide and also a list of references, along with a short section on person-centered practices, Resident Bill of Rights, and the Individual Abuse Prevention Plan, which is actually very important to consider when using the taking care of me as a guide. So I can talk a little bit more about that later.
What I really liked about the book is it tells it how it is. It does the psychological, the physical, and it says when you're a caregiver, you know, it relates to like when you were a little child, you know, your parents took care of you. Then pretty soon you got to grow up and you got to learn how to take care of yourself. And it's kind of like defensive driving. You have to look out for all these things and know how to react. And this workbook demonstrates it very, very well, I thought. And so great job. And what did it take to actually get the book to go to print?
Well, it took a fair amount of time to, to do some research on the various topics to make sure that I was being as inclusive as possible and to make sure that the workbook is accessible. So we created the graphics specifically for the workbook. The top half of each page is for the individual with a disability, and then the bottom section is, yeah, there you go.
Hold it up so maybe the camera can.
Okay. So every page there's a bottom section.
That's a sample page there.
That has activities, so how to actually put it into kind of daily use. It might be role plays, affirmations, all sorts of different activities to reinforce the concepts. And the idea is that, you know, we want to both empower individuals with a disability at the same time as we decrease the likelihood of any kind of maltreatment or assault. So the workbook has those two goals as the primary foundation for the workbook.
It also lets people know that we're part of the population.
Yes.
I mean, it draws that out in a nice, subtle way. And
what age range was this designed for?
The workbook is for individuals, probably designed for individuals who are between 18, actually I would say between 16 and 100. You know, I used to teach self-defense to women over 60 at senior centers.
Right.
And so it is for all ages. The grant actually focuses on home and community-based service providers, so all the waivers of medical assistance. So when I try to get the workbook out into the hands of individuals with a disability, I go through the home and community-based service providers and then ask them to review it with the individuals they provide services to, and then provide incentive funds for them to do that, because many of them are not receptive to the idea of self-advocacy, self-defense, self-defense concepts, self-determination, etc. I've often get the response from home and community-based service providers, and they say, we're good, we're good. And then my thought is, you're not good, because everyone should have access to information. It's like bringing someone a book from the library and giving them one book and saying, there you go, rather than allowing them to go to the library and look at all of the books.
We don't want people to be good, we want them to be great.
Yes. And we want them to decide what is good.
Right, you're in control, you know? What made you decide to get into self-defense?
Well, when I lived in Oregon, I just took it as a community education course, and then I was going for my master's in women's studies, and I was a teaching assistant, and they were looking for new courses, and so I mentioned that I had taken some self-defense classes, and as a result of that conversation, they asked if I would teach, and so I taught several university courses, and then I've taught community education courses for the past 30 years.
Good for you. Yeah. Well, many years ago, we had Dwayne Fredrickson, who used to be with the Minneapolis Police, came and gave a course on self-defense, and it was great too, so I've always been a big advocate for that too. So what do you expect out of this book, and what would you have done different?
I see this as a starting point for a conversation that we're going to continue, because the conversation is in the hands of individuals who have a disability, for them to determine what their lives are going to look like and what the next steps are. So one of the issues is that providers, so home and community-based service providers, like at a group home or employment setting, they often take on a protection approach rather than an empowerment approach. And more than half of the assaults that take place are by someone that you know on a first name basis. So if we rely on the people that are taking care of individuals with a disability to protect them, we're missing an important piece, because those are often the individuals that are actually, initiating the maltreatment or abuse or assault.
Let me tell you a little story about that quick. I've always lived in a house, and now I have an apartment someplace out here. But when I was a junior in high school, the school system that I belonged to had an independent living program. They was big on it. And I wasn't, because I just got out of the hospital, but I went. And there was 3 boys and 3 girls in the program. We had it for 2 weeks. And one of our girls that participated in the program got raped. And so it was an experience, and that's all I'm going to say about it now. But I'll never forget it. And that's why I was never big on having an apartment. I always had a house, but I've got an apartment now, and it's working out okay. But it's something you'll never forget. So I'm glad this is one of your pieces of this book, and it's really a great book. Are there any books to come forth after this?
Well, let me say yet that this workbook has been translated into Hmong, Somali, Spanish, and Braille, and the workbook is available free of charge at least through the end of June. Perhaps we can give some contact information. So it's Aging Options MN, as in Minnesota, agingoptionsmn@gmail. And if you email me, I can email you an attachment of the workbook, or I can also send a hard copy.
Great. So, and any other thoughts you might have before we?
Well, just that we are hoping to come out with an employment edition of it called
that'd be great.
called Self-Advocacy
Yes.
on the Job.
So, one more question: how are you marketing this? Do the voc rehab counselors get this when these people are juniors in high school, or?
I
how do you
have
do
made thousands almost of calls and emails to home and community-based service providers throughout Minnesota, along with advocacy organizations, the transitions programs through special education, et cetera. So,
Okay.
yeah.
Anything we might have missed? It's kind of, let's call it the final word segment. Let's jump right into that.
The goal is just to get it out to as many people as possible. So if you know of anyone who would benefit from it, please let me know.
Sure.
Who did the artwork?
My daughter,
Great.
yes.
And the artwork looks like this before we go.
Yeah.
And then when the employment book comes out, please get a hold of us and come on back on the
That
show.
would be wonderful. Thank you.
That'd be great. I'm big on employment, so that'd be great to have you back.
Great.
Okay, we'll be right back with more Disability Viewpoints. And thanks, Sydney, for being here, and thank Joan for sitting in today. We'll be right back.
Thank you.
You bet. Hey, before I go, Garnett Lodge in White Bear Lake, if you like good pancakes, May 17th, they're on sale. You get the tickets earlier, they're $10. They'll be about $13 at the door. 4923 Stewart Avenue, White Bear Lake on May 17th, 7 a.m. to 1 p.m. Stop by and we'd love to see you. The proceeds benefit our lodge, and so we hope you help out Garnett Lodge. I'd like to thank at this time Sindy Mau, the author of Taking Care of Me, for being on the show. She announced she's having a new book come out on disability employment that's pretty important. And Joan had a good guest too. And thanks for being in here today, Joan.
Yeah, well, glad to be here, Mark. Fabulous guest, Jenn Purrington, the Deputy Director, and I believe she's also the Interim Director of the Office of Implementation, or the Olmstead Implementation Office. And we talked about the 2026 plan that's being created, and that's really exciting for all Minnesotans to learn how they can move forward in the place where they want to live.
We don't realize how important a thing that Olmstead
Right.
account is, so I hope everybody who can have a part in that to get it passed and keep
Exactly.
it running becomes involved in that. Our legislative session is ending up pretty soon, but if you can get down there to your legislatures and see them, our disability community needs a little help right now. So anything you can do to support us, that'd be great. Again, thank you for supporting this show. I'm Mark Hughes for Joan Willshire and the entire crew here at SPNN. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next time on Disability Viewpoints. Bye for now.